Hello, everybody. I hope you're good. Hope you're smiling. We're sitting here in the studio. We're with Aaron. Aaron is one of our panel members, one of our experts who's been with us now for quite a while, and we're going to be taking a look under the hood, as it were, with dear Aaron. Lovely gentleman, very calm, centered, and focused. I'd love to give him an opportunity to tell you all about himself. We're going to be rolling unrehearsed, of course. I don't know what questions I'm going to ask. He doesn't know what he's going to say. That's the way we like to roll. And he's obviously a occult, esoterically inspired man with experience in Rosicrucianist philosophies, cosmologies, Western occult theory, practice, and an overview to different philosophical systems. He's also got a YouTube channel, which you'll find if you click onto my YouTube. You will see his YouTube channel is recommended there, and we will be flying his linked tree tag as well. Though, enough said. Beautiful brother, do introduce yourself. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you. Thank you for joining us, dear Aaron.
Thank you for having me. This is the first time that I'm doing a live interview like this, unscripted, as Franklin just mentioned. That's the way we like to roll. Just going with the flow and seeing how things go. I have been studying the occult and mysticism and anthroposophy, Rudolf Steiner, pretty much anything esoteric I can get my hands on. Really, I focus a lot on the imagination. I have a very analytical type mind, and so I like making diagrams and showing the inner workings of the human being reflected with the external world, and working through different meditations and just really trying to unravel a lot of the programming in order to get at the core. And I'd say I'm just, ever since I was a little kid, I've always been someone that's asked very big questions and just wanted to know, what am I doing here? Why am I alive? How do I navigate and understand this reality? And that's led me to meet a lot of incredible people and just been on some wild adventures. And recently it's led me to this space and participating with the roundtable panel experts and finding Franklin, which I felt his ripples, I'd say, through a variety of spaces. I think it works like vibrations or water or sound waves. People's influence ripples, and then I try to sense the awareness and hone in on where is it coming from, so I can talk to these people and see what they're about.
Absolutely lovely to have you on. So we're going to throw you into the deep end. And where do we start? Well, let's start with you. Let's start with your journey. Always good to go back to the beginning. What inspired you? What brought you to start questioning the nature of this reality, what we've been spoon-fed, the conditioning that we've received, the way the world seems to be topsy-turvy, upside down, back to front and inside out, crazy and not always rational, though sold to us as the real world. What caused you to start questioning all of this and deciding you needed to delve deeper and look into the more esoteric occult pathways open to you?
I'd say one of the main things is I just had a mind that was always kind of racing, and it was very analytical, and it was like a supercomputer that was just always running, and it caused me to not be able to sleep. And I just had all of these questions, and things just created a level of, I'd say, almost like an anxiety in me. And so I wanted to know, how do I bring this energy that feels concentrated, I guess, in my mind, and allow it to start to sink down so I can be more relaxed and peaceful. And when I would ask questions and try to reveal the inner workings of how I felt inside my human vessel and viewed the world, then I noticed that it was met with a lot of resistance from the adults or the teachers that I would ask these questions and want to know, how does this world work? What am I doing here? And I was met with the resistance, and it's like, why do people not want to talk about this? It seems like the most important thing to me. And the other part of it was, when I was younger, I would have very intense dreams and especially hallucinations when I would get sick and have fevers. And then I grew up with pretty bad asthma as well. And I just didn't like the fear and the pressure that the medical industry and a lot of people would place on me. And it felt like something was wrong. My intuition said, no, I shouldn't have to live this way for the rest of my life. So I'm going to practice swimming and holding my breath and running and do whatever it took and face this fear of not being able to breathe until I'm able to either break through from it or I succumb to it. And so that was kind of a challenge that I was met with when I was little. And then another big part of it was once I got older, just kind of accepted that, okay, I'm a young person. I don't have a lot of experience. I'll just trust whatever everyone else says and I'll apply it until I'm old enough and I've got the experience and I can have some resistance against it. And so I did kind of what everyone said. I went to college, did really well in the business world, and then I started to see that the business world had these layers of reality to it, where the world that the average employee was living in was not the same as the managers above them. And then as I got higher and higher to the upper leadership positions, that was a whole different reality. And then to the level of board of directors and involved with people doing these mergers and acquisitions and capital equity and like pretty high level things. And I realized that people were creating realities for the people underneath them. And then there was a human element that was beyond my mathematical and accounting and finance background that was really the biggest resistance that I was facing when I was navigating these different layers. And then I was like, well, is society that same way? And then that just kind of started to open things up more and more until I eventually started venturing into more of esoteric and mysticism. And finally, I found people when I studied some mystics that, hey, these people have a mind that reflects really well my own mind. I can actually learn from these people, and they're willing to talk about death and some things that my teachers and adults that are around me don't want to talk about. But those are the questions, I have.
So it sounds like it started when you were quite young, and obviously that's a very shamanic story, actually. Illness leading you to have to face fear. Fear is an interesting. You mentioned fear, an interesting force. We all tend to run from fear. Fear tends to be our greatest teacher very often, ironically, because it's when we break fear we tend to break through. So you found your way into Steiner's work, and did you say you met individuals? Was this like through lodges or online or through your work? You might have met
I've
people like
always
that you
been
work with.
I've always been really into fitness, and so I was a cross country runner. I did a lot of extreme sports, specifically raced dirt bikes and mountain bikes, and loved the adrenaline rush from extreme sports. And that was one of the ways that I was able to finally shut off that racing mind. If I had enough adrenaline and I was doing crazy enough things, then my mind shut off, and then I was in that flow state and body awareness, and I was finally at peace. Um, and so physical activity really did that for me. And so that led me to be involved in more communities. I'd say men's groups that were involved with weightlifting, with martial arts, or just any type of physical activity. And when I think it was when I was living in Arizona, I found my way into a group with a very popular fitness person on Twitter and whatnot, and I ended up meeting a couple guys through that online group, and we've kind of stayed connected ever since. And one of those guys had a healing story. He had a chronic illness for a long time, and he had a self-healing journey to overcome that. And when I talked to him and I met him, he was inspired a lot by Goethe and Rudolf Steiner, and he had met these people from um, I think it was the 70s, and they've been doing this work for decades and decades about this whole hidden world with the anthroposophy and everything. And they had this mystery school that they had built, and this collection of forbidden books and works that just opened a whole new kind of reality to me. And that's been a similar experience for me as I venture into these different groups or spaces or go to these adventures with my heart open and my mind open and willing to connect with people and hear their story. I find there's this whole world and reality that they've lived, and I can start to venture into it. And there's just all these unexplored realms here within this one realm. And so I've been connected with him and that group for many years, and I'm very fortunate to have met many of them in person. And once I meet them in person, it's just finally like finding someone that's got a mind and a heart and a spirit that reflects closely to mine, and I can be at peace and have conversations with them and connect in a way that I can't with the ordinary human being. And as much as I still appreciate my connections with everybody that I interact with at a base level, and I'm compassionate with those people, there's definitely a urge to connect with other people at a higher frequency and really dive as deep as we can and share our realities. And I call it a little bit more like a level of spiritual intimacy. It's me opening up my eyes and showing somebody, here's how I view the world, here's how my mind works, here's how my spirit has ventured through earth, and I want to share it with somebody. I call it the sacred communion, where we're engaging and sharing a level of discourse that not many people are fortunate enough to have those kind of conversations. And I think that is unfortunate that people don't get to experience that, because some of the best moments and memories of my life are from getting to be in a sacred communion type space with other human beings and share our worldviews.
That's beautiful, brother. Yeah. There's an old saying that when the student is ready, the master appears. And it's never been more true. You know, it is rather fundamental to what it is, I suppose, as it works. I also noticed that, and for those of you there below is Aaron's YouTube channel, and we're going to be talking about that in a few minutes. He's got some content he's been starting to pump out there. He's starting to get a bit of a rhythm going, beautiful rhythm. So the imagination is what captivated you, working with the imagination. Obviously, the imagination is the key to the structure of reality. When you which part of reality is not being imagined? Try and spot that part. Tends to all be an exercise of imagination, this whole experience of reality. So when did you start working with your imagination exercises?
I started with those, I'd say mostly last year, where I started actually creating videos and writing with it and really trying to speak in a way that's more of an allegory. I've been doing that for a number of years, but I limited myself, I'd say. And really what I noticed was there was a barrier with my ability to effectively communicate with other people. And for a long time I thought, well, if I just give them enough information, if I give them books, or if I share certain rites of passage with them, I tried all of these other things, and for whatever reason I kept coming to a point of resistance where I was like, there's something missing. I can't connect with everybody and in the way that I want to. I can't shift the way that they think and their consciousness and help them to see things that are right before them that I can see, but they can't see. And I want to be able to be the person that breathes a little bit of life into their vision and helps inspire them, be the generator for them. And there's some people that I was able to connect with like that, and it's very meaningful for me to have that experience because you could see they awaken, their life force changes, and they go out and they accomplish all these things, and their visions start to come true. And then they come back later, and they're like, "Man, thank you for inspiring me, or thank you for doing this." And so it fills me with a lot of life force. And so I think being drawn to that experience made me realize, well, how can I be more effective with that? Oh, I need to be able to stretch people's imagination and help them to realize what's inside them. And so the imagination for me is like working a muscle. And so they need to be taught how to stretch this muscle and strengthen it so that way they can imagine new realities for themselves and start to live out their dreams and explore the world. And so that's why I started working with the imagination. And I feel like my imagination is really strong. I have a lot of visions and dreams, and I go through thought exercises all the time. I still have the racing mind a little bit. It's turned down to such a huge extent. I can go into more of a meditative state and utilize it in a way that's beneficial rather than it being more neurotic, I'd say, and just focus on things it doesn't really need to be. And so I can use my imagination and sync with nature and do things like that that allows me to be more productive and be in a more calm state and more functional, I'd say, without needing to try to self-medicate it away or doing something like that.
Self-medication. Ay. Self-medication. I'm not smoking cannabis because when I do, I smoke like 100 grams a month. So yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I love THC. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I just don't like smoking. Don't like covering my lungs with gunk. But yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said about finding alternative solutions to self-medicating, because self-medicating is obviously not productive. I mean, unless your medication is a meditation of levitation, the levitation that the heart experiences in nature. So this is interesting. You've been doing a lot of these meditation exercises, and a lot of them are quite lovely and quite abstract. And you've also been putting some other information out there. I watched a piece that you did the other day, which was about counterintelligence. I found that rather beautifully articulated, and really is quite on point. I mean, this is really what is going on. All of that, what is it? Fact checking that we hear about all the time. Has it been fact checked? All of that nonsense is essentially, I suppose, the evil big brother face of this. So I take it you've also been looking into a lot of conspiratorial content, political. Obviously, you come from a financial background, so you've seen how higgledy-piggledy the financial system is. How do you reconcile the spiritual with these? Yeah.
So I actually have worked for the federal government when I was in college. I was a employee for almost 4 years, and this was at a facility that they have the vaults and everything. And so I've got some experience seeing how the actual federal government runs at various levels. And also, when I was in college, I was in an internship with the local police department doing white collar crime investigation. And so I got to experience how does the criminal system actually work? And is this set up to really be successful? And what I realized was that there was something seriously wrong with the way that these things were set up. They were not set up in a way that a intelligent, experienced person would design this structure in order to be effective, in order to meet the goals. And I've always had a lot of military and police type friends as well, so I have that influence. I was in exercise programs where it drew a lot of military people and for different fitness events. And so I like talking to a variety of people. And also I found that a lot of people, they just don't have the imagination required to really understand the pressures that we're up against. They simplify what the dark malevolent force is in such a simple manner that it allows them to continually be deceived, and they don't quite realize all of the different forces that are in play, the level of I'd say occult forces, and the knowledge and understanding that a person that I would call more of like the dark magi is using to weaponize occult forces and these intelligence type experiments in order to shift and subtly move their mind or the minds of an entire community or country. And they're very covert about it, and that's what I started to realize and see as I went into these different groups. I saw that they would be infiltrated, whether by human forces or non-human forces. It's difficult for me to really tell the difference, because the way that the mind and the human being works, we're creatures that are able to deceive ourselves. And so as a result of that, when we get into groups, the groups can deceive themselves. And so it becomes hard to determine who's actually doing the deceiving. Is it me, or is it, or is it somebody else, or is there something outside going on? And that was something I've been trying to wrestle with and map out. And so the video on counterintelligence was at the request of somebody that was noticing that, hey, I've gone into these different spaces trying to grow organic food and go into these communities that are trying to return to nature and go into more holistic healing and home births, and just try to bring things back to the old ways and kind of reject the new technological age that everything's going towards. But for some reason, he was saying it seems like these groups are getting hijacked. I can't tell if it's the person or if it's something from the outside. And so that video was really directed at him in order to help educate him and give Armin with some tools to be able to understand how to navigate the world in these different spaces. And my example I used in there was describing Brahma, Shiva, and Krishna, which was partially inspired from a question I asked you on the roundtable. So I thought that was a great example. I've got a good story kind of linked to Brahma, and so that's why I asked the question.
Yeah, it's a beautiful episode, and it really hits a note in me personally, because it takes me back to when I was an activist as well. I recall, like, we did all sorts of. We took UBS to court, which is like the biggest Swiss bank and criminal bank. I mean, I'm sure you know UBS, and they bank for like all of the big corporations that want to hide their money. The Church of England. I'll let you in on something. The Church of England, like so. A lot of the people who worked for me or with me in my projects that I was organizing, because Phoenix and myself were sort of on point with Chris. There was the three of us. Though Phoenix, myself, and Chris were all in court, appearing in court to take UBS to court. And we possessed At the time, must have been about 300 million US dollars worth of real estate from them, and we took possession of it, and we did it all by the book. We had a Queen's Council member representing us, so we were like following the law, you know, as much as you can, like as if the law even exists. It's going into those big courts with those big players is ridiculous, because you see what a sham it is. We started off with one line of narrative, and by the latter part of the court case, we were actually telling the opposite. And that was perfectly fine in court. To start off saying that we are not an activist organization, we are doing this in order to provide such and such, and then to turn that around and actually we're an activist organization. So, like, literally, that's how you can change the narrative in court if you've got the right legal team. And it's totally legal, which is like legal fiction of the court is hilarious, especially when you're dealing with big numbers. And, you know, the legal team that we were facing was the Magic Circle. But what really got me was just how the tactics and techniques that were used. So UBS set up surveillance equipment around our building. There were dishes pointing at us from all the buildings around. They had somehow gotten permission from all the other buildings to put their dishes on to our buildings that we were organizing into an activist squad, and started to get different organizations moving in there to do different projects. And it got to the point where they were sending people into our buildings. You almost won't believe this, to draw sigils on our walls. Yeah, sigils. And not just any sigils, sigils by people who know what they're doing, like proper occultists, which was, for me, mind-blowing. I didn't expect it to that extent. And there were literally spiritual attacks happening on the building. And there's a reason why they call that legal team the Magic Circle, because they do have access to these kind of things. And apart from that, I mean, getting injunctions in the middle of the night, getting injunctions by the morning. An injunction, like, is a new piece of legislation that affects like a whole it's a serious piece of documentation to get, to be able to pull a judge out of bed in the middle of the night in order to get an injunction so it's ready by 8 a.m. This is the kind of thing that these corporations can do. So they've controlled the police. I was abducted by MI5 and drugged. And so, you know, this is the private corporation having access to these governing bodies. It just shows how connected these cabals really are. It was, for me, it was mind-blowing to see, because I'd read about it and I'd heard about it, but to actually feel it. I had my phone hacked while I was in my hand. While I was talking to people, my phone turned off and on. And I was commenting, I said, wow, my phone just turned off and turned on. The contacts came up and started deleting the contacts. I had to rip the battery out. And my phone was the main phone for all the contacts in the whole organization. So Phoenix had certain contacts. I had most of the contacts. So I had about 1,800, 1,700 contacts in my phone. 300 of them were deleted. About. Right in front of my eyes. Thank God I had a phone that was an old Samsung phone that I could rip out the battery. So this is the kind of thing that my phone was being used to attack me. My phone would suddenly start hurting me. Luckily, I'm sensitive to radio waves. And I'd like have to put it like over there. And the battery would drain in like 2 hours, an hour and a half. And that was, to me, obvious that they were amping up the radiation, right? Because when you've got a battery that should last 36 hours and it's draining in 1 or 2 hours, and the phone's actually hurting you to the point that you've got to put it far away, you can't keep it in your pocket because it actually was hurting me. So this is the kind of tactics that they were using. Incredible how they had access to my phone to boost the phone signal because it's within a safety limit. So there's so much to be said about this. But this is interesting. Have you, when you were working with these huge corporate structures, did you notice anything strange about the people you were working with in terms of potential connections to cabals and such?
I don't know if I can comment on any of them specifically, but I will say that in some of the groups that I've been involved in, especially the ones that are gaining increasing popularity, I tend to have almost like a gift where I'm able to sense I call it this sensing a void. And so I think that I'd call it the light and the dark magi are kind of played against each other in order to create kind of like a false rift. And I call it a void. And so you could see the duality in spaces where two different reactions are played against each other, and it creates this void, and I can kind of sense it. And so I've tended to find myself in situations and places and involved with people where this void was just kind of starting out, and then it kind of takes a rocket ship, and some of these spaces and groups have gotten extremely popular and captured the attention of a lot of high level figures. And then all of a sudden these people that I would not normally find in a low level group start entering the space. And I'm very good at reading people. And like I said, I've been involved with some people that have been in the military and the police force and the government. And I've had some training with people that I'd consider more like operative type people that actually have worked for some of these corporations. And I've learned from them. Um, and so I can sense that these people have a different level of training. And it is very apparent that they have a level of training that is far beyond just, your local level education. This is involved with some, I'd say, occult type sciences, and definitely very high level psychological type work, especially one of the most apparent ones would be language patterns and NLP and hypnosis type work, where I've seen that the ill-equipped person who doesn't understand these types of things, they don't know how to guard their energy field. They don't know how their thoughts and everything work to an extent where they are not a willing participant in some of these discourses. So I've kind of engaged in a level of battle of the wits, I would call it, with some of these people where I know that they're trying to steer and manipulate me, but I have such a great understanding of the inner workings of my own mind and spirit that they become extremely frustrated because they're not able to penetrate through, where they're so accustomed to being able to, I'd say, navigate and move and steer people at their own will, that it's become their default mode of operation. So when they meet someone like me, there's a level of resistance, and I've had some conflicts with those types of people because it's like, who's this, this guy who's able to combat my level of superior training. And so I've been outed from a number of groups and spaces because I feel like I try to come into a lot of those spaces and counteract some of this and start to equip people with the information and knowledge they need in order to make informed decisions. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily playing any team, but I think that the people should be equipped with enough knowledge and information of their own inner workings to make informed decisions for themselves. I don't like it when somebody comes in and tries to manipulate and steer people without their consent. That I think that's a violation of a level of natural law that steers me the wrong way. I like to kind of combat that. And then you were also mentioning the political movements, like the activism. That was also part of my journey as well, where I was hearing these different narratives about events, about different political figures, different activist groups or movements. And so I was like, well, I want to go and see those for myself. I don't want to trust whatever I'm hearing online or in chat rooms or the news. I want to be boots on the ground and go experience it for myself. And so I started visiting a lot of these events and groups, and I found the reality of that event and what I experienced does not match the narrative that I'm seeing in these different spaces. And so I started to be able to kind of map out how these things were working, and also spot the people that the same way. Hey, I'll go into a space, it's a smaller event, not a big deal. There's certain archetypes and style of people, how they interact. I go to a different event, and all of a sudden there's these groups of people that are obviously there to fulfill an agenda, and they're not what I would call an organic gathering of people. There's an inorganic insert into that movement in order to steer and shape it for a larger agenda and direction.
Wow, what you're saying is just bringing back memories for me. I remember I wasn't specifically in Occupy, but I always used to go and support Occupy because we were in Sun Street in the square mile of London, and Occupy was by the church, which was about like maybe a mile away. And people always were keen on me talking in Occupy because I had maybe different ideas. Yeah. And I was a little bit sort of well known in London because I'd been a coordinator of the Festival of Life, which is considered the most ethical festival in the UK. It's raw food lifestyle. And I had picked up the Festival of Life because it was going to collapse after my friend passed away. He was one of the main coordinators. And so they'd asked me, can you pick it up for us? Because we're going to cancel it. And I said, no, you're not canceling it. Not after my friends just kicked the bucket. You're not doing that. I will make this work. And so we did it, and it was the biggest one ever. So I made a lot of contacts, and I'd always sort of known a fair whack of people in London. But anyway, so I noticed that there were people, and I'm thinking of one guy who I actually knew fairly well. He was a really close friend of a really close friend of mine. Alexander Lee was my best friend, and he passed away. He was a major proponent of activism, major, from all different fields, from counter activism. I was in counter activism, counter culture. In other words, we never asked permission to do a protest. We just did it. You're supposed to get paperwork and permission. No. We just do it because it's about we were dissidents, yeah, and we were not going to ask them for permission to go and exercise our freedom of rights and speech. We were going to just do it. In fact, we organized protests right outside the House of Commons, which is not allowed. We got away with it. So, anyway, bottom line, an old friend, someone who was very close to, and I knew this guy quite well. And he was quite a big part in Occupy. And because he was also an old activist. And I noticed him changing. And there were another few people who I knew as well, maybe not as well as I'd known him, and I noticed them changing. I believe that these people were being programmed because it came down to the end that he was accusing me of being Illuminati. It sounds ridiculous, but I was being accused of having connections with these organizations because basically because of the way we were running the Bank of Ideas, there was organization in the Bank of Ideas. We weren't the bosses, but basically we were responsible for the premises. And Phoenix, myself, and Chris had made a pact that if the ethics of the situation in the group went out of track, then we would just hand over the keys and we would walk out of the building. We were responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars of real estate in court. So we had to do it, register the buildings, health and safety reports. We had to be trained. We had to be health and safety trained so that we were health and safety engineers, if you can call it such, and had to have a certain amount of it goes against the anarchism. But anyway, I started noticing people started attacking me a lot on Facebook, on all different platforms. And it was because Occupy used to want us to come and talk there. And when the bank account was jammed, closed, there was no leadership in Occupy. and they were chanting myself and Chris's name. So we had to come to Occupy to talk to them to agree to go and be part of an audit because they had their bank account shut because 20 grand had gone missing or $30,000, and there was a fire and it was all suspicious. So anyway, I've noticed that a lot of the people that I'd known for years, and I knew these people for like years, they changed like overnight to the point where you couldn't even recognize the human being. And it's not natural for people to change that fast. I actually believe that people were being abducted. I know that sounds incredible. Because there were a lot of people that I noticed that had weird situations happening to them and they had missing time. So the level of psyops, I don't think people would believe if they heard it. I found triangular. I'd wake up and I'd had like 3 holes in my arm, like needle holes. Like, what the hell? Like a little triangle. I'd be like, what is this from? You know, even myself at times. And this was after I'd left the activism, and there was crafts outside our house, above our house, and I didn't believe they were extraterrestrial. I believed they were human. If that makes sense, you know. Secret, deep government, they've got technology. I've seen things here in South Africa that would blow people's minds in places where I know that the government used to test hardware. Because I went there to go and spend the night in the deserts in these places, and I saw these triangular crafts that do incredible aerial maneuvers. And they are not extraterrestrials, because I've had experiences with extraterrestrials as well, and their crafts and their consciousness is different. So anyway, it was interesting just being in that point. So I can completely relate to where you're coming from, because a lot of the people that were connected to us, there were people that came to us. We had like lots of members of parliament and lots of people from different corporations involved. And we had Tom York, you know, and Radiohead were aligned with us as well. They actually did a free gig for us in our basement. But well, Tom York did. But my point is that a lot of these people are suspicious to me. And that guy wanted to come and be a part of our movement, and I was blocking him. What's his name? He became a big activist, ex-comedian, drug taker, British comedian, Russell Brand. Russell Brand wanted to get into our buildings, and I was like, there's no way I will walk out that door. That's not the image we need. But so I completely relate to where you're coming from. Like a lot of these very powerful people do have these connections, and I've witnessed it. I went to a very old Anglo-Saxon school where my headmaster, I was sure when I was a boy, had psychic abilities. And I used to tell other children, and they didn't understand. I used to say that he is trained. They said, well, what do you mean he's trained? He's trained in the occult. He's a magician. And people thought I was just making it up, joking. But I used to go to the school at night, and I used to look at the right dates during certain solstice events. And he'd come through marching with a group of old boys from the Old Boys Foundation, which is basically a funnel for Masonic connections. Being the oldest Anglo-Saxon school in the country, a lot of history. They used to go and do things under the swimming pool in a secret chamber that they had, that we were never allowed to get near to, in a special Old Boys Foundation space they had created right next to the pools. And the only boy that was allowed to be there with them was a boy that was gay. How weird is that? So
I've noticed, you know, especially a lot of these types of groups or societies, they have a really keen eye for people with a level of talent or a high level of like ESP, natural ability. And so I'm definitely that person. And I've always been surprised when I go to first it happened in like business environments. I would enter, and then quickly I would be promoted and placed in leadership positions or given a huge level of responsibility. And then I noticed it also when I would go to different spaces and groups. I was quickly put in a position where all of a sudden I'm in a leadership type role, and I'm tempted with a lot of things in order to start to place me and position me so that way I'm able to be maneuvered, I guess. And I noticed that with other people that were talented, they also got placed in a position where their level of temptations and things that they can be rewarded with, or things that are going to pressure them with a lot of fear, allows them to be steered and maneuvered. And I was fortunate where I'm able to perceive that, and I break through a lot of temptations that I noticed other people weren't willing to go through. And and I've been tempted with a lot of monetary rewards and various things that I saw other people, they were susceptible to it. They weren't they didn't have, I think, the connection to maybe spirit or understanding of how higher order processes work, where they didn't trust that, they weren't able to break through some of those fear barriers. And so they kind of got trapped, like you were saying, in these movements or functions, and basically became steered as a puppet to whatever pressures that they were having placed on them. And I saw that just kind of over and over. And I think a lot of that comes from, I've noticed that the people that are in service to self or in service to an agenda, they've closed themselves off from being able to perceive anything else. Where I've noticed, if I'm in service to others, if I'm trusting to the divine, if I'm positive, if I'm connected with my guides and my higher power, I always am able to make it through situations. And I kind of have events where it's I don't know if it's my higher power, if it's a divine intervention, if it's just chance with the way the reality works, where if I trust that, I've been in a lot of really bad situations, and some sort of, I wouldn't maybe call it a miracle, but some sort of window of opportunity opens, which allows me to get through and escape safely. And I'm still connected with my guides, and my mind works in a way that I'm still able to perceive possibilities outside of the control structure. And so that's also why I share a lot of the diagrams and the imagination exercise, because I think people need to be equipped to combat some of this high level advanced technology and occult information, so that they are not placed in a position where they're almost hijacked. Whether or not it's advanced technology or some sort of, like you were saying, abduction, or how the I'd say the spirit navigates. I think it's important to be in the pilot seat. And we witnessed a few years ago that, for whatever reason with the programming, I don't know if I fully understand it, but the pilot was removed from the driver's seat, and the person was steered and navigated as a collective egregore type hive mind. And that seems to be a phenomenon where we have to choose to be willing participants in this collective or not. Go ahead.
Are you talking about the guy who had dealings in that whole story with creating that war with Russia? We're talking about the BID.
Oh,
Let's not
no, I'm
say
not
too many
familiar with
names.
that.
Oh, you don't know about his son? What's his son?
I do
Hunter.
not.
His son's name's Hunter, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm
With
not
the
familiar with
briefcase.
that.
Hunter Biden. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They had the whole war that was happening in Europe on the edge of Russia. They were involved before all of that went south with the contracts, with the money.
Yeah, I think also people are not aware of the long-term strategic planning of a lot of these things, and so they assume that things just kind of happen by chance, and people just make small immediate decisions. So I think the average person is focused on just making small short-term type choices, and they've never been involved in a group or a power structure, especially at higher levels, that execute long-term planning at a very high, detailed, concentrated level. And so they're not able to quite imagine, you know, and run strategy type games to see how all of these pieces start to work. And I also think that our memories are not programmed in a way where we are taught to be able to have pattern recognition over long periods of time, which is really setting people up to not be able to see some of these forces and long-term plans play out. And so they're always just kind of, looking one direction here, but they never see the whole big power structure that's actually going on. And so I'd say that a lot of these societies and political movements are planning things over such a span of time that there's definitely a much larger agenda that's at place. And I think that a lot of these, wars and different movements are setting up for things that, might be many decades, if not longer, in advance. And you can start to see that there's patterns amongst it. I think that different places, perhaps like the Middle East and Ukraine and different areas of focus are going to be key areas as these new, smart cities or whatever's in play in the future, or for a larger world power structure. These are already getting set up to be potentially capital cities or something of a larger network. They don't happen by chance. You don't level a place and rebuild a whole new infrastructure because, it happened, there was a little conflict between this person and this person. No, it's a much larger orchestrated design.
Absolutely, totally. And like you say, the Ukraine thing was building for a long time. Okay, so let's look at the war in Iraq, Desert Storm. All of those wars happened because the pipeline was being built. They were going to finish the pipeline in 2002. Don't know if you know that. So the pipeline would have been finished in order for them to pump their own oil, both east and west. So they were going to be pumping Arabic oil to Europe and to Asia, both to India and China. And that oil line was getting built, and it was proposed to be finished in 2002. And then 2001, what happened? Big war. There was another pipeline that was just about done, with Ukraine being in the middle of the pipeline for natural gas and oil. And just as they were getting to the point where they were going to start supplying Europe directly, so we can see that generally where there's big wars that happen is normally over pipelines, and it's got to do with resources. So we're definitely living in a very jaded world where everything seems to be, they'll tell us all these narratives of why the war's happening, but it's actually happening about stopping the sale of oil or stopping the sale of gas so that certain factions can control finances, because those factions are in control and they don't want to relinquish control, and so families get built.
And the way that I was able to perceive some of those narratives like you're describing is I would go into a group. So the ones I'm thinking of are people that are trying to go on a spiritual healing journey and deprogram, because, hey, I've met some guys that they went over to the Iraq war, and what they witnessed there in actual experience did not fit the reason that they signed up or the narrative that was being spun in their home country. And so when they're met with this conflict, then it causes them to go through kind of like a dark night of the soul. Their programming and their identity and their reality structure starts to disintegrate, and they don't have an immediate outlet in order to be able to talk to someone who can guide them through that experience. And so they end up traumatized, and then they self-medicate. They're met with, fear of death, imprisonment, blackmail, suicide, some of these things that I don't feel like a human being should have to go through. And so when I would go and meet and talk to these people, I felt for them. I understood what they were going through. And so that's also how I was led to find some more holistic healing groups and people that were understanding and had gone through these types of deprogramming journeys for themselves, and they were there to be of assistance and of service to other people that had gone through this, and help them. And I think, I was surprised that there's not many people that actually reach out for help and try to deprogram themselves and reorient and come out okay on the other side. A lot of times the general population, you go and do some horrific things at a war that was manufactured for corporate interest and a larger agenda, and your reality is broken, and then you go home and your family and friends can't understand it, your own countrymen can't understand you, and then you get people that just end up self-medicating, and or they're led to get on pharmaceutical drugs, and their minds are just warped and distorted, and that's the extent that, sadly, they live out their entire lives in that state. And I don't think that human beings are meant to have that experience. Again, it bothers me because it's somebody that's gone in and they're controlling and manipulating the human being's potential for self-fulfillment and a higher understanding of what the spiritual experience is like. And I feel like that is a fruit that every person should be able to have the opportunity to experience without a level of control and deception manipulating them to prevent them from having that connection to source and experiencing a higher level of consciousness.
Yeah, you're right. There is definitely this, it's almost like people are, this is what I noticed, and this is sort of what I'm trying to get at, and I'm going to try and turn this into a question because I think it's quite valid. It made me think about it when I was watching your program, which was really, really great. For those of you that haven't seen Aaron's, his YouTube's at the bottom, take a look at it. It's worth checking out. He's got a lot of really interesting original content out there, which will be tackling things from a different angle, looking at things from a different perspective. Though what I noticed was activism is activism, and spiritual groups are spiritual. And there's like this very clear line of division between them very often. And the activism tends to sneer at the spirituality to a certain extent. It's very rare for people from that tradition to break into activism like myself. The only reason I was able to is because I got credit. Like, I speak Hindi, Urdu, Nepali, Pahari. I lived in India for so many years. So they're like, okay, so this guy's for real. He's not just some new ager, like reading books and stuff. A lot of people known me for many years, and they know like my journey. Yeah. Because a lot of my friends I've known for like quarter century. So they knew me, and I'd go off to India, and I'd be in India for like 6 or 7 years and come back having been living barefoot in the jungles. And, so I got that sort of cred, respect, whatever you want to call it. But I noticed that there was this very clear line division, and it's almost like it's been instrumentally organized to my perception, which is sort of what your video made me think about. As if there's this division that's been created, that spirituality goes there and activism goes here. And so the people that are involved in spirituality are sitting there going, but they're not really doing anything. And the people that are doing things are like in denial of spirituality, so they get a bit crazy and they do some random crazy stuff, and they open themselves up to this manipulation because they're not spiritually protected. I'd love for you to comment on that division that has been created, and why it is and how it sort of enacts.
Yeah, that's a key point I was trying to describe with the creation of voids, and that's how the light and the dark magi are played against each other. I've noticed that. I don't know if it's initially a phase that the mind goes through where it's very dualistic, or if that's something that's been programmed into us and entrained for the human being to have those kind of controlled thought patterns in order to create an environment where they're able to be controlled. It gets into the kind of like the chicken and egg scenario. I notice a lot of the thought exercises and the things that I do, once they start to enter the realm of a paradox, then I know that I'm starting to get close to completing that circle. And that's one of my beliefs, is more in a fluid reality. And so that's what I end up perceiving, is that, hey, a lot of these patterns, if I look at them and I step back and I see the higher order of things, there's a cell division. I think of it as the circle of the cell splits off, and then you've got two things that are able to be controlled from the outside with kind of that orbit moving around. And it takes somebody who has the fortitude in order to break through from the dualistic level of perception, in order to start to perceive the movement and flow of these two different dualistic cell structures that have been designed. And I think that's very reflective of kind of like the hero's journey, where I notice I've gone through a lot of things and pressures and came back, and it feels like the hero's journey, where I've exited this dualistic thought structure and went against some of these forces long enough to be like, hey guys, here's what's actually happening in your different reaction groups, and here's how to break free from it. I've got a general kind of map to help guide you, and if you're willing to walk the spiritual path and navigate your own internal structure, I think you might discover this is a helpful resource and guide as you navigate the world and the human experience.
That's beautifully put. And I think that is really fundamentally what it is it's that polarized systems. They polarize the system, and then they give that system its opposite pole system. Oh, this polarity or that polarity. You can choose. Freedom of choice is there. Choose this polarity or that polarity. You must be in a state of polarity. You must be polarized. You can't just be in a unified state, because it doesn't exist. See, there's polarized or polarized. Sort of like you can choose Kentucky or McDonald's as you know, evil metaphor for food.
And you can see it reflected in people's speech patterns too. Like when we think of, people, you observe their level of discourse, and it's like, oh, I like this sports team, or I hate this sports team, or, I vote for this party, or I hate this party and I vote for this one. It's very red and blue. It's black and white. It's dualistic. And you can see that pattern repeated over and over in their speech, their actions, what they identify with. It's very much a core structure of how they navigate the world. And it's very rare to find somebody that can see that and takes on more of a Trinitarian perspective. And so I try to find people that, have entertained that or think that way. And then that way I can have a better reflection of myself and how I think. And that's a big reason why I've been drawn to a lot of the esoteric and specifically a lot of mystics, is because they speak about this phenomena. And it's interesting that it's something that has been going on for hundreds, if not, thousands of years. And I can see it reflected in, these ancient works. They're talking about the same thing that I'm experiencing here in the present day reality. And that opens up even more questions, what's going on with that, and how come people haven't been able to shift or transcend that?
Yeah, well, it's all hidden in plain sight. I think that's what the problem is. They are so good at what they do. They've hidden it in plain sight, like right down to the eclipse, what's been going on here, with the CERN and NASA launching these APEP rockets, or in ancient Egypt, I believe it would have been APEFI. Yeah, because every consonant has to have a syllable. Sort of like not Toth, but Tahuti. Yeah, not APEP, but APEFI. Or APEPI, but I think APEFI, because it's a feminine P in the second round. Makes more sense if we were considering what chaos is, because chaos is a contained unit with masculine and feminine both in it as a concept. But so they've definitely gone through great pains to hide it. The Simpsons keep predicting what's going to happen. It's not by accident. Our television's oh, how's this? You mentioned about choices. People don't know this. I was watching Home Alone episode 2 with my son some time ago, and my mind was just blown. So he gets to this hotel, the Sheraton. Yeah? Sheraton, I think it's called. Is that correct? Sheraton. Big hotel in New York. And he's causing all these nonsense in this hotel, as he does, Home Alone kid. And the guy at the desk says to him, "Oh, the next president is downstairs. You might meet him." And of course, this child, now this film is in the early 90s, right? When was Home Alone 2? Was it 94? Anyway, the 90s. He meets the person who's going to be the next president downstairs in the lobby, and guess who it is? Donald Trump. A young Donald Trump. I mean, they were loading us with the bullet of, this is what you can expect in the future. In the 90s, they knew that he would be the president one day, because why else would he be playing the cameo role of the presidential official who is in line to be the next president, who happens to be coming through there with his party trumpets and all, and it's a young Donald Trump. It blew my mind. I was like, holy crap. I watched this film when I was a kid, and I didn't actually notice then. I didn't remember that Donald Trump was the president to be in Home Alone 2, which is in the 90s, which is like, what's that, quarter of a century before? More? Almost 30 years? Or
That's that,
more than quarter of a century.
That long-term planning on display right there. And one of the things that drew me to your channel was talking about the three worlds of the shaman, with the etheric, the astral, and the spiritual planes, because that's also very much a Trinitarian type level of perspective. And I could tell it was very advanced knowledge and information that was synced up well with the spiritual path, with somebody who has actually walked it and navigated the internal and external world. And so that's, I could see that ripple playing out in a variety of spaces, which helped me navigate and find here. And I think that one of the fundamental laws of the etheric manifestation is that there needs to be the creation of an environment first, almost in like the astral type plane. And I think that people have advanced level of physics and higher level knowledge of the reality in a manner where they can start to manipulate things on an astral type level. And then the manifestation comes later as a result in the etheric. And so I think people see this play out with a little bit of the predictive programming, but they get a little too honed in and focused on just like revealing the method or something. I'm like, no, if you step back, there's a much larger and well integrated concept here at play, which I think is that their creation of environments first, etheric manifestation comes as a byproduct of it. And if you work more on that level, then you'll be able to shift reality more. And I also view more I believe in a fluid reality. And so people get a little too hung up on just the Mandela effect, but that's that same thing. I think that people are able to create more astral level programming. The etheric comes second, and then so you can start to see how this past, present, and future becomes more of a circle. And there's phenomena that happen as a result of that, but we can't get too focused on just what's happening in the etheric. It enters the level of a Maya, and a lot of strange things start to happen, and it becomes very tacky, and it wants the attention of the mind to focus on what's going on in the etheric. But people should step back and see, hey, what's going on in the astral? Can we start to play this game at the same level? And then maybe that's how we take back our power. Because I've also been involved in some groups, where I wanted to push back against, we go back to the activism, push back against what's happening. But then I saw that no, it doesn't matter what playing in just the etheric is a losing game. And I saw that it happened too many times, that you play in just the etheric and you want to start just playing in like the level of violence, you're opening yourself up to be controlled and manipulated and setting yourself up from defeat. And it's almost I don't know, it's just a losing game. But then I saw if you start playing more in the astral, you're opening yourself up to your guides. You're starting to open yourself up to past, present, and future connections, and you're going to be much more successful and be better equipped to combat some of these dark forces. And so that's kind of also what I'm trying to send ripples out into the subconscious of humanity in a way, because I also think that the conscious and subconscious is linked at an individual level and then also a collective level. And that's why even just a small number of people, if they're working and helping to program the subconscious of a collective and the of humanity at the astral level, we'll start to see more and more people naturally reflect that, like the mycelium network of a forest. And I've seen a lot of tremendous breakthroughs over the years from just a small amount of people, even if they're not necessarily super popular. But whatever waves they're sending out, whatever frequency, it's affecting a lot of people. And I'm hopeful that that'll continue to happen as more and more people work to program the subconscious of collective units and of humanity to be able to play at more of an astral level. And I think good things are in store for humanity.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned the astral. From a shamanic perspective, from shamanic cosmology, they simplify it and they speak about the underworld and the spiritual world and the middle world. And so the middle world is the astral, essentially. It's the world where the spiritual plane, which is sort of the more archetypal plane, which is more related to the causal influence, causal body, that which moves between incarnations and carries the seed of consciousness, the Akash, is where we get our inspiration from and our direction. And the underworld, which is the lower world of the shaman, is where we do a lot of the work, the shadow work, going in to observe our shadows and discover what's inhibiting our power, what's draining our resources, what's wasting our energy, wasting our efforts. And then when we step into the middle plane, that's when the magic happens. That's when the changes occur, because we are able to take the direction from the causal and tie it in with the influences of the underworld in the astral plane, in the middle world. So the middle world is where healing would be done. Like a journey into the middle world would be to create a change in somebody's energetic body, specifically, if that makes sense, which is the astral plane. And so the astral plane, like as I see it, relates to emotion, but not specifically emotion as a feeling. And as a feeling, emotion has the quality of presence. And as a quality of presence, it's those feelings of love, compassion, anger that can create such powerful currents in people around us, which is why when we look at like the big messages that we get, like be it Emmanuel's message that they call Christ, right? Which is essentially one of love and of compassion, or the message of the Buddha, which is of compassion, or the message of Allah, which comes in the form of mercy. I think it's the most common word in the Quran, mercy. It's interesting to think of that, because we've been given these narratives, and after living in all over the world, I noticed actually the more open-minded people that I've met very often, in terms of letting other people be, is often the people that follow Allah, which is weird because it's not what we've been taught, right? It's not how we've been taught to think and believe. And so it's fascinating. I found the Christians to be the most oppressive everywhere where I traveled in the world. We tend to want to oppress everybody else. This is our way. It's the right way. Your way's wrong, you know? And often when I met Muslim people, they'd be like, Inshallah, that God's will, you know, Inshallah, it's God's will, let it be. Whatever kind of attitude seems quite prevalent in a lot of the places where I've been. Even when I was in Pakistan, I was surprised because I was there doing a nuclear war standoff and everybody had AK-47s in the streets. And I was walking around with a guitar. And I wasn't supposed to be walking around in the streets. They were like, you got to hide in the hotel. I was like, damn, never going to happen, mate. I want to get out there and see what's going on. And there's everybody just mobilizing with AK-47s. I was like, bloody hell, I didn't know there were that many AKs in the world. Everybody seems to have one. I'm the only one who doesn't have an AK in this whole city. And but there was never a moment where I felt unsafe. And people were like happy and accepting of, so what tradition are you? I was like, well, I'm a Shivite. They were like, wow, lovely, respect. But don't think you're going to pay for any food or any drinks around here. What are you talking about? You got a guitar. You pay with your music, you know, which was a very refreshing thing to see, you know, people having that love for music from a different culture, even though it's not their cultural music. I never witnessed this anywhere else before, interestingly enough. And in places in India, you know, obviously I was all over India. But I did notice that there's this interesting emotional current that, like you say, goes further. Walking around with a guitar on your back and love in your heart is more dangerous than walking around with an AK-47. That's what I felt. I felt like you guys are unarmed. I'm the one who's armed. That's what it felt like, funnily enough. If
That
we can get
reminds
into your...
me-
Sorry, yeah?
Oh, that reminds me. One of the things that kind of drew me away from organized religion and more into shamanism was that I would enter these different spaces, and I've always had this idea that, hey, if the archetype of Jesus or a higher level master shows up to one of these religions where they're supposedly worshiping him, would they recognize that that's the master? Would the master recognize that they are celebrating him? And would he be welcomed and invited? And that's kind of the mentality I've had entering those spaces. And I realized they would not welcome a stranger, let alone their own master. And it would probably be difficult for them to even realize, you know, that that's who they're celebrating. But when I went to groups that I'd say were more spiritual, especially this shaman type community that was in the desert near a Native American reservation, the people treated each other like human beings. They had an appreciation for the spirit that was behind the vessel, and they treated people in a manner that came from a very compassionate and loving place. And I could just tell as soon as I went into that space that, oh, these people they have an understanding of what I'm experiencing as a human being. I want to learn more about why these people are the way that they are. And so that's kind of how I ended up finding this shamanic group out in the middle of the desert.
Totally, brother. That's exactly it. Like, it's when you wield the power of love, it's the most powerful power in the world. And I've seen how it can change things. Like, you can send love towards somebody who's like really not in a good place, and you can watch them change in front of your eyes. And I've often been in situations where just the right feelings can inspire someone in front of me to do something for another human being. Like, it's not like you're controlling them or anything. It's just you're making the potential possible so that they can choose it if they want to. where they maybe wouldn't have been choosing it just out of the blue, but because of the feelings in their hearts, they are suddenly like inspired. Like I'll give you a classic example. Let's say you don't have much and you're sharing the little bit of what you've got with someone, and someone else sees it. They'll be like, wow. Then they'll go and share what, more. And it becomes like a domino effect until somebody who's really got a lot sees this and goes, you know what? I've got a lot. I can share a lot with a lot of people. And it's interesting how it all starts with a feeling, and that feeling is like flows through us like a domino effect. So you're totally right with the astral being the key, because that love, it's that recognition. I'm feeling you. You're feeling me. We're feeling each other. Kind of
I've
energetic
got another
resonance.
example.
Yeah. Fire away.
It reminded me. So I used to like to kind of jolt people a little bit, because I could tell that people will get stuck in the ruts of their own patterns for so long that they can't escape it. It creates kind of like a little bit of a prison. I don't know if the neuron pathways in the mind or whatever, if they have the same route for so long that people just can't break away from it. But I remember this one example, and I had gone to this restaurant, and it was a small little restaurant. It was super cold out. It was the middle of winter, and I liked walking around, without a coat or anything like that, and not acting like I was cold, just kind of embracing the feeling and the sensations. And so I was walking around out in the cold, and this guy got extremely frustrated and upset that I was not wearing a jacket. And so I was just like, it's not cold out. It's a beautiful day. God loves us. Everything is great. I, just have love in my heart, and just being so excited and, happy that it created a jolt and a shift in his mentality, and you could visibly see it kind of affect his energy field. And so I don't do it as much now, because I've got to be kind of careful. I've learned to be careful who I jolt and whose consciousness I kind of shift, because sometimes it can not have the best effects. So I've learned to be more careful with it, but definitely having the love and the compassion and the positivity can cause somebody's astral plane or something to change, and then it shifts their ability to get outside of that rut and that prison that they've been trapped in, and it breathes life into generate their force and ability to maneuver.
Makes me think about the children in Kathmandu. Little children that aren't children anymore. And because they're not little children anymore, they don't get the compassion from the adults that they deserve. Because they've learned to be little adults at 8, 7, 9 years old. And they've learned to think like adults at a young age. And so they don't get, I mean, if you ever go to Kathmandu, you understand what I'm talking about. It's heart-wrenching. It's heart-wrenching. There's a lot of these children on the streets with glue, without much food. And I think it's interesting, because when the child is in a perfect childlike state, you want to give them things. People want to give them things. People want to help them, because it's an instinct within human nature. And when a child ventures away from the inner child, then that child sort of almost cuts himself off from help. And you see people just walk past the children and they don't notice them anymore. And it's shocking to observe. Wow, you don't notice these little kids sitting in the gutter. Wow. Then you notice these little kids are trying to scam and rip everybody off. You go, shame, man. You're a young little child. You shouldn't have to think like this, You shouldn't have to be like this to survive. It's not right. And, having their minds tempered in this unnatural way, from being hungry and cold and, having to figure out how to be conniving or whatever to get what they want. And It's just heartbreaking, but there's something to be said about this inner child. And so this brings us back to your imagination exercises, the inner child. Because to me, imagination exercises are all about uncovering the inner child. So let's delve into your imagination. I see we've been talking for an hour and 24 minutes. So it gives us a lot of time to like really get into the imagination exercises. I think that'd be a great thing to focus on. I don't even know what to ask you with regards to the imagination exercises, but could we run through some kind of a mock, or not a mock, but some kind of an idea of a structured imagination exercise that we could turn into a conversation? Is that even possible? I'm sure. I reckon we could do it. What do you think?
I guess we'll just have to flow with it and see what happens. I mean, since the eclipse was so close, one of them, you know, I had yesterday when I was walking to this field that's nearby. And so what I did was all day I left my phone and my keys and, all of my belongings far in another room out of sight. And I wanted to kind of remember what it was like when I was a child in the desert. And so this was long before phones and social media and everything. I would just, open the front door and I'd be gone. I didn't have a watch or anything. The sun was up. That meant it was daytime. The sun went away. That meant it was nighttime. Everything in between was playtime. And so I just went and ventured out and let the desert guide me to find and play with the animals and the critters and experience what the day had to offer. So I kind of mimicked that a little bit, and I didn't have even my keys or my phone or anything on me. And I just walked out the front door and headed to this field because I felt like I should walk there and not drive. And over here where I'm at, and I've noticed this kind of in the South and a lot of other states, they don't have sidewalks. People don't really walk around anywhere. And so I just went and walked to this park and I let my intuition guide me. And so I didn't have a specific spot picked out where I wanted to go. I just tried to feel inside which tree or which laying down spot was calling me to and inviting me to go there, because I think different places carry a little bit of its own energy. And so honing in my intuition allows me to open myself up, I think, to be guided maybe by the higher power or a spiritual or astral type environment. I think they're very subtle, which is something that needs to be trained. We're so used to having very, I'd say, lightning and penetrating type commands that cause us to move, that we've lost the very subtle ability to communicate that transcends language and something, just a small shift in our sensation, like a breeze. And so I allowed myself to find this field and find a spot. And also I like, focusing on the awareness of the feet when I'm barefoot. And so I've noticed that, hey, as I traverse different terrains, the terrain gives a feedback to my feet and my sensation. So if I'm going to somewhere and my feet are more prickly and it's getting kind of stabbed, well, maybe there's a vegetation and a plant life there that requires me to bring more awareness to my immediate environment. Where if I'm in somewhere that's very lush and green and grassy, the environment of my feet is more trusting. And then I can scan the horizon and look back. And so I like to play with the environment more to train the intuition and the imagination. And so I ended up finding this spot near a tree, and it ended up being perfect because it was a great spot for me to just lay down, and I watched the entire eclipse from, and it was like the perfect vantage point. And I just did it by letting my intuition, guide me. And the funny thing is this tree had this staff that was leaned up against it, this huge staff of very hard wood, which is not often found over here because much of the old wood is is rotted out. It's very humid over here. The termites get in. But this stick, for whatever reason, was very hard. And my intuition told me you need to carry this stick with you on the way back. And I was like, that's a subtle signal. I should probably listen to it. And what I didn't realize was after the eclipse, the dogs and stuff are affected by it. They were freaked out. And so as I was walking home, there's this big dog that I think was in a angered and shifted state because of the eclipse. And he was threatened by my presence. And luckily I had this staff with me because this dog came bolting at me and just coming after me. And first I was inviting, oh, hey, buddy, and then I was like, oh, no, this guy's coming. He's coming after me. So luckily I had my staff. And so I had to plant my staff and send out the vibration. No, you've inflicted some fear in me. Now we are going to duel if you come into my area. And I was getting ready to smack this dog. He sensed the shift in the vibration. He bolted, and that was the end of it. So it's very subtle things like that. If I hadn't listened to the staff, perhaps I would have gotten bit by that dog, or I would have had to run and, gotten injured or something. So it's just little subtle things like that. And that's what I'm trying to also get people to trust with the imagination is you can be guided if you trust things, and you've got to learn how to train that kind of communication that transcends language. And maybe it's more feeling, emotion, symbolism. It's embodying a particular feeling or emotional state and letting it be there to witness it and let it flow out, let another one come in. So I think I'll start with that.
That is rather a good example of applied imagination for a useful outcome. I do think that there's definitely something to be said by, like I always say, my gut is never wrong. If I get a feeling in my gut, I can put money on it. Like literally, I can put money on it. Like literally, it's there's something about the guttural sense, and I think we've got mycelium living in our guts, right? Networks, the equivalent of, and the equivalent of these mycelium networks are also extending from outside of our body. And so there's this bacterial, microbial world out there, and our gut has got like a direct link into it. And it traverses a big distance. And I think there's something to be said about being in tune with these subtle vibrations. Probably something in your gut was like urging you. It's interesting how I literally feel it in my gut. And I think we can become more attuned to our imagination by listening to our guts, literally being aware of our gut, being aware of our stomach, being aware of the digestive process that's happening within us. Because information can be seen as digesting. So we take in pieces of information and we've got to chew it. And then we've got to masticate the information and take it into smaller pieces and dissolve it into little tiny bits so that we can then absorb the imagination. And once we've absorbed the imagination, we need to assimilate this information so that the information becomes a part of us. And then we can apply our own experiences and life's knowledge, which is experience. That's the only true knowledge that there is if we're going to be real about it. Belief and reading in books is belief. But what we've experienced is what we know. So we can apply our true knowledge of life experience to the information that's been digested, absorbed, assimilated, and then it becomes part of our construct, of our point of view, perspective, then rests upon the strut of these new pieces of information that have been. So the gut and the whole process of digestion sort of represents the process of learning. And so by meditating on the gut, we're meditating on that ability to take in information and apply it. Sort of, it's so were you eating that day?
I usually like to fast. So before I have kind of more of a ceremonial type event, I need to quiet some of the thoughts and feelings from the gut, because different foods send a different vibration. And I've noticed if I have a belly full of a particular food, if it's especially heavy food, if I've got like meats and spicy foods and stuff, the wavelength or whatever it sends causes my intuition to be diminished, and I can't hear the subtle signals as much. Where if I fast and maybe I have a couple teas that I like, that time I had a tea from a guy that I met in the desert who would visit the Amazon and harvest this plant called ohosacha. And I noticed that this plant has a very good vibration, and I've had kind of a connection through repeat meditations. So I had some of that, and it allows me to connect more with, kind of like you were describing, the mycelium in the gut. It seems like if I'm more in that awareness of the vibration through connecting first with the tea plant that's in my gut, then it allows me to tune up more with the signal that sends out that vibration, and can possibly, I think, communicate more with the vegetation and plant life that's around in nature.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is the purpose, I think, behind fasting, is to become more aware of the gut. Also, I mean, obviously, there's the base root that when your gut is active, the blood flows from your brain and your heart to your gut. But when your gut's not active, that freed up blood can circulate through the brain, refining the way in which the brain works, giving it more potential. So the heart and the brain can talk to each other better, because the brain's got to do a lot of listening to the heart. So there's this two dual nature, but there's definitely a big part of it, I think, that has to do with this fasting, which relates to being able to actually listen to the gut, because if the gut's busy digesting, it's not talking, if that makes sense. Like, it's either talking or digesting. So this is very interesting, because this is something I think that we've not been taught to do in the West, is to fast. We've been told that we've got to eat 3 meals a day. Most of my life, I ate 1 meal a day. Most of my life. And I was always healthy.
A lot of people in the West, they've never fasted ever their entire lives. And got somebody that's gone 60 years eating 3 meals a day plus sugar. No wonder they're out of sync with communicating with the subtle energies of their gut and their heart. It's always been in a constant cycle, and they're in fear of it. I noticed even the first time that I did a long-term fast. I like fasting, 3 to 5 days. I try to do it a couple times a year, every 3 months, because I just noticed that if I don't, then I can tend to get stuck in a programmed pattern. And if I can't break through from the thought pattern and the emotional pattern, then I know I need to fast. And then fasting will allow me to free up the energy to break through from some different thought patterns. And the first time I did it, I almost had the sensation that I was kind of having a heart attack. First time I did like a 3-day fast, and later I learned it. Well, I got to make sure I have some salt and electrolytes as I'm going through a longer fast. But once I went through and broke through some of the fears of not eating, and just kind of trusting my body's built to withstand this, and knowing, ancient people, a lot of what I do is I try to connect back with ancient people and be like, well, if I was an ancient person walking around and I had to hunt for my meal or gather berries, it's very likely on a regular basis that I had to go multiple days without having any food. And so for me to connect with the ancestral experience and be able to imagine what that person felt like and experienced navigating the world, then I need to participate in some level of how those actions and navigation impacted their thoughts. And so by doing a long-term fast, I can start to imagine how that person experienced the world. And I noticed fasting cleared up a lot of mental clarity. I do a lot of experiments and I don't really understand all of the details or the science behind it, or the technical aspects, which I like when I interact with somebody and they're able to kind of confirm, hey, there's actually some science and some actual knowledge behind what you're experiencing. So it makes sense that, hey, no blood going to the gut frees it up from the heart and to just flow between the heart and the mind. That's why my sense of perception was so strong. And it almost seemed like I could hunt or gather berries and connect with nature better if I was fasting, like my body was actually equipped to prime itself to find food, just like the way a ancient person would do. And then that opens up me to be able to perceive, well, if that's the case, why are we told to have 3 meals a day and want people to never stop eating? Oh, we don't want them to break out of their thought cycle and their thought pattern. And we want them to stay programmed. We want them to continue to have consistent profits for corporations, and to make sure that, they eat things that are harmful to them. Fasting, I think, clears up a lot of cancer and dead cells, which I notice when I do long-term fast, my body goes through a cleansing, and my skin looks better. Everything gets better after I fast. It's like the body needs to go through a fast in order to self-heal. Well, if we don't self-heal, then we're better equipped to be taken advantage of by the big pharma medical industry that wants to, again, have consistent profits and take advantage of people through a agenda that furthers the will of the people that are running it. So, it's just something simple like, that's a lot to gather from just doing a little fasting and listening to your gut, walking out in the nature.
Yeah, and you mentioned being barefoot as well. There's something quite powerful about that. And once again, the danger element of being barefoot, because you're more vulnerable when you're barefoot, and because you're more vulnerable, you're more attuned. I've noticed this. Excuse me, one of my copper bottles fell over. I used to be I used to compete fighting martial arts, and my senses wishes to say, like, you need to keep your hands up, and I be like, no, I drop my hands. Get in the ring and I drop my hands. And it would freak people out. Like, what the hell is this dude? He's dropping his hands. Like, what the hell? I liked feeling vulnerable. The more vulnerable I felt, the more attuned my reflexes became. So there's something about allowing yourself to be totally vulnerable so that you can break through into your superpowers, your siddhi. And so being barefoot in the jungles, or like you say, in the desert, in the desert, you can really hurt your feet. Jungles too, don't get me wrong. I lived barefoot in the jungle for long, big chapter of my life, and continually having to be super conscious of where you walk makes you so super conscious of your posture, so super conscious of your surroundings, so super conscious of the terrain, so super conscious of every little thing. So because I was barefoot, I could sense the snakes where they were. I could sense the spiders where they were. I could sense the creatures. Because I'm vulnerable on my feet, I've got to be aware. I can't just accidentally step on a scorpion or step on one of those, because it's really going to bloody hurt. And if you're living in the jungles, it's not just going to hurt, it's probably going to kill you. Like you could injure your foot, and that could cause your death.
And the first time I observed somebody that had more awareness of how they place their weight and how they move their feet with more awareness. They don't just just walk and it's just like duh, duh, duh. They're careful, almost cat like. Well, they have a different energy appearance to them, and it almost shifts the awareness or draws attention differently to all of the people around them. And so it's very much like you're saying with walking around barefoot, especially I noticed at night, I'm very vulnerable. I can't just crash my feet into a spot. I'm not going to be able to just sprint in the darkness if there's a threat coming. I need to expand my perception, and it almost distorts time in a way, and where you have to move in like a slow-mo, and the thoughts can't be racing. You need to be very present and aware of what's going on. You can't be thinking about something in the past or something in the future. You need to be present, because there could be a life-threatening situation or an injury alone in the dark. Your survival depends on that present awareness. And I was never a competitive boxer or anything, but I noticed with my meditation techniques when I would go to boxing class or sparring, I've done a lot of meditation, but I noticed I was able to train my mind to kind of go into more of a slow-mo. And once I was in that vulnerable position and very present and vulnerable, but not in fear, I was able to be extremely quick. And we would be practicing our sparring or exercises, and it felt like I was moving more in a slow-mo, and the other person, I could sense almost their awareness was shifted and distracted. They weren't focused and channeled with their strikes. And so that way I could perceive them, and very easily I could see those openings and, and counteract. And without a ton of training, I actually was able to spar quite well with some well-trained people.
I'll add an imagination facet to this, and I think this is quite interesting. We live between 2 and 4 seconds in the past. That's what neuroscience says to us. And it's got to do with the processing of the information from the senses moving through the thalamus, where it's recoded, put into a new context of coding information. From there, it gets passed through the cerebral cortex to the parietal lobes, where the imagination structures our sense of reality, and then it's recombined and presented to us as a dream. And so we're living in this dream of reality that has been reconstituted by the neural infrastructure. And much of it is affected through the endocannabinoid system by our astral field, by the emotional plane of our hormones. As the hormones are tuning into the DNA, because they're all amino acid chains, the hormones, the DNA. So they talk to each other. They're just on a different frequency of resonance. DNA is obviously resonating much faster. It's a very fast vibrating resonant field. The hormones are not as fast, but still fast, much faster than the electrical field of the resonance between the synapse, which is a slower field, the etheric field. So this etheric and astral realities are put into context in our body through our electrical resonant fields in our nervous system, which is the final recoding structure of the hormonal information, which is basically communicated via the DNA, which is very interesting because the DNA seems to be in resonance with what's happening. So reality, I believe, is an etheric experience. Reality isn't physical. And the etheric experience of reality is put into a physical context in our brains, and we live in this physical idea of reality, which is between 2 and 4 seconds in the past. It's such an interesting concept. So if you're in the boxing ring and someone throws a punch at you, they actually threw that punch between 2 and 4 seconds in the past. But it feels like it's happening now. What a concept. So it's between 2 and 4 seconds is a long time if you time it like it's about that, you know. So like you say, I think when we allow ourselves to go into a zone where we're not thinking, we're not wasting all the capacity of the neurological infrastructure, which puts strain on the system, extending it from 2 seconds to 4 seconds or 3 seconds. And I think we can break the 2-second barrier. I think we can break the 1-second barrier, maybe, if we're in a state of Zen, or like the Japanese call it Zazen, or, you know, whichever concept of it you take. So in that state of Zen, then the mind is being basically, you're cutting away all the stuff you don't need. You're not wasting any resource, and just reality is being processed, like the bare bones of reality. And so that physical world image of the etheric template that we structure in our minds then doesn't take so long. So like you say, you literally are closer to the etheric field of consciousness. And if you're in the etheric field of consciousness, you're actually in real time. So if you're operating through your etheric body, you're in real time. So that's like the key, or the chi, right? When you're able to, when you're in your etheric body and you manipulate, you're actually channeling your etheric substance through your techniques. And so that's where the like superhuman strength abilities come into play, which is really interesting. How far in the past we're actually living. And most people don't recognize and realize just exactly how far in the past they are. And like you say, it takes getting into a ring to show you when you're in the past, because it hurts when you're in the past. It hurts a lot. So you're very vulnerable. You've got a lot of incentive to not be living in the past because you don't want to be getting hurt. So there's definitely something to be said about martial arts and spirituality, which is almost ironic considering how the whole notion behind martial arts has really got a lot to do with like panel beating the opponent. I mean, on the surface. But there's actually a profound spiritual journey, a hero's journey happening underneath the covers of two blokes beating the crap out of each other.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of that I think has been lost with the modern forms of the UFC, and a lot of people that are just kind of want to play the macho male and, oh, look at me, I'm the strong man capable of violence and all this. We're playing, with a set of rules. We're playing a game with a set of rules where actual reality doesn't work that way with that set of rules. And then also I think the spiritual aspect is just missing so much from a lot of the martial arts, because for me the benefit was, again, I've got the racing mind. I've got a very deep connection with wanting to have a divine connection, and with nature, martial arts opened up a ability for me to meditate and have a greater awareness navigating my human vessel and seeing what it's capable of, and some of the magic behind playing with these altered states of consciousness, and how even just walking and moving barefoot, it takes a lot of to throw a kick, to throw a punch, how you move and shift your weight, how you see things coming at you, how you can train your mind to process information and focus things. There's just so many deeper layers of information behind something that's so simple, and not experiencing that is unfortunate. Or if only people want to do it for an aesthetic region, or to play aesthetic reason, or to play a identity part, is not the way to go, in my opinion. I think we're almost at 2 hours. If we want to close it out, and we could probably keep talking
do you have
forever.
to go? Do you have to go?
My little husky is starting to get very cranky downstairs. He is ready for his playtime, so I better take him out before I have to go to work.
Well, it's been absolutely awesome. If there's a few things you want to say in closing, it's been a lovely conversation. We'll have to revisit this. If you have time, sometime, we'll do a part 2. But it's been lovely. It's been lovely touching base. And for those of you that haven't taken a look at Aaron's, it's down beneath. What is the story with Magna Aaron?
So
Where did that word come from?
it's magma, kind of like the
Sorry,
under
magma.
the earth.
Yeah.
But in reality, magma was the color of one of the vehicles that I purchased, and I really like the color. It's I used to work in a paint and body work, and I've done a lot of mechanic work, and I like the pearl type paint jobs because as the sun reflects on it, it has a different color to it versus at nighttime it looks different, and so it's kind of that visual effect. And I kind of also like playing with different energies or different identity forms and shifting my appearance and form and identity with people, being a little bit of a shapeshifter or a trickster at times. So I guess there's many layers to that. But yeah, in
Cool. That's
closing,
lovely. So it's at
this was
Magma Aaron. Easy to remember. Magma flows under the earth, and Aaron with 2 A's.
that is correct.
Aaron.
And
If you put a D onto the end of the N, from a Germanic or Dutch perspective, it means eagle. Arend.
and the eagles are one of my guides for sure. I noticed that eagles are very much a common phenomena in the shamanic type journey, and so when I've moved to new places, especially the eagle, I think it's more of like the golden eagle that's a little bit darker colored, that looks like a hawk, maybe from the Himalayas. Because I had a vision, an altered state of consciousness one time where I became a golden eagle ascending the Arctic and got to feel what it would be like to fly and have the vision of an eagle and feel the cold Arctic winds, but no, I'm protected with the feathers. And so I get a lot of my inspiration for imagination exercises as well from shifting my consciousness to imagine what it's like to be different alive aspects in nature, whether they're animals or plants. I know the plant one comes from a lot of the Goethe type meditations are reflective of that. And there's the very symbiotic relationship between human beings and the plant life. And there's definitely a lot of truth to unravel by just meditating on our symbiotic relationship with plants. But yeah, it was my first interview, and it was a pleasure having you and being featured on the roundtable the last number of couple months. And it's been quite a while since I've been watching your videos, and there's just so much information and wonderful knowledge, and it's very authentic, and I appreciate all of the work that you are doing in the space and in programming the subconscious of humanity to share the incredible journey that you've walked in your life and your time navigating this realm.
Likewise, brother. I've been getting a lot of joy. I haven't seen enough of your programs. I haven't been watching much. But I what I've watched, I've enjoyed. I'm definitely going to be getting back to more of them. I've got a few of them like in my bookmarks, earmarked for when I'm actually got more time. Time seems to be running through my fingers incredibly fast these days. But that's how it is. I've got a girlfriend now, so it adds to and I've been doing a couple more shows as well. I'm going to be releasing another show. I've edited it, doing another part of The Lady Tomorrow. So sending you so much love, brother. And that Eagles thing, I can completely relate. Once, I'll give you an anecdote. Once I had an eagle, and I think we're getting towards a 2-hour mark. And you mentioned doing 1.5. We can release this as 2 separate hour marks, our part 1 and part 2.
Oh, we could do the full 2. That's good.
Hey, do the full 2.
Yeah, full 2.
Yeah. So I once had an eagle land on my head in Udaipur. Literally, it swooped down from the sky and landed on my head, and it sort of poised there and then flew off. Like a massive eagle with a wingspan of like almost 2 meters. I don't know, no exaggerating, but it was huge. It's this thing, these wings were over there. I was like, what the hell? And sort of it was so gentle. And it sort of like landed on my head. And I just and then it sort of just bobbed up again and it flew off. That was in Udaipur.
Yeah, before I moved
I was meditating once.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going
to say, once I was meditating. Sorry, yeah, no, continue.
Oh, before I moved here, I looked for eagles or hawks to help navigate where I'm supposed to go in the world, because sometimes I don't really know. But the eagles or the hawks tend to always show up and be good guides for me. And so I had this massive bald eagle show up when I was trying to figure out my next place to live. And he flew like right next to me, and those things are just huge. And that was the first time I had seen a big bald eagle so close that just flew. And he was just chilling right next to me. And he was like, yeah, you should come here and check out this space. I think you're supposed to, move here. And so that's a big reason why I moved to this area.
I've never seen a bald eagle. I'd love to. But I've been sitting. I've had eagles sitting surrounding me. When I was in meditation in Udaipur, on a roof, because the roofs are flat, and I sat for a long time. And when I came out of a profoundly deep trance where I was like, basically I almost died, because I was going to cross over that point where I wasn't coming back. And then they like convinced me, like, because this council, this group of people, they convinced me like, no, don't do that, because you're not ready. You're not coming back to your body if you go past this point. Because there's like 9 different octaves. If you cross the 9th one, you don't come back. But like doors that you go through, or octave doors. But when I came out of that trance, I'll never forget this. Opening my eyes, they were sitting right next to me, all around me. It was about four eagles sitting on around with me on this roof, and they were all sitting with me. And I was like, wow, they're big. Because I was sitting on the floor, like I think I was sitting in Padmasana. So it's like they were like just about as big as me off the ground. Big birds, beautiful, beautiful, graceful birds. They were sitting right next to me, just chilling with me. I'll never forget that feeling of like, okay, I'm gonna sit here for a while and chill with these dudes. I'm not gonna move. I'm just gonna sit here and enjoy this flow. And even while I was uncoiling my legs, because it's so much pain when you move your legs, right? Because they're like numb, and it's like it's agony. They were like just chilling there with me, because they were so used to. They must have been sitting there with me for a long time. I almost felt like they were watching over me, keeping me safe while I was on my journey. Anyway, there's something very special about eagles. I think we share that. The eagles are. There's something very special about those birds. To watch them fly, the way they navigate. If you ever want to see lots of eagles, go to Udaipur, India. They're like rats. They're like rats. There's that many of them. Anyway, brother, it's been lovely chatting to you. Thank you for joining us. Everybody, this is Aaron, a roundtable expert. You'll probably be seeing a lot more of him on the roundtable. Have an absolutely gorgeous day. I hope your husky is going to be happy and enjoying the playtime. You take it easy. It's been lovely. We'll have to do a second segment at some point. Om Shanti. Blessed be. Have an absolutely awesome day. And thank you all for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed. Down there at Magma Aaron, that's where you're going to find him. Just put it into your YouTube and you will find his exercises and his contemplations and his ideas that he's just sharing with you from his heart. So much love to you all. Blessed be. Om Shanti.